Hey you guys, welcome back to another Flickers of Fear movie review. So the movie I'm talking about today was actually a recommendation from friend of the show, Dermot, who actually sent me a PayPal donation and asked if I would please, pretty please, cover Fright Night Part 2. Now, we've talked about the original Fright Night a lot of times. It's actually one of my favorite movies of the 1980s, for sure one of my favorite horror comedies of all time. And I had actually seen the sequel several times on cable, I believe, back in the day, like back in the late 80s, early 90s, but I had not got around to talking about it, so I thought it would be a good time for a revisit. Now, the thing about the sequel, and Dermot had mentioned this, I wasn't aware of all of this that was going on because, like I said, I saw this a lot back in the old days when it was on cable. But what ended up happening with Fright Night Part 2, and this was kind of a shame, was that when it came out, it's actually listed on IMDb and Wikipedia and everything as a 1988 movie, although I believe it didn't really get a theatrical release, at least in the United States, until like late summer or early summer of 1989, somewhere around there. And when it opened, it only opened on 148 movie screens, as far as I'm aware, and only ended up making about $2.9 million back on an $8 million budget. So obviously it was a financial failure, and at the time got almost universally negative reviews. And not only that, but it's pretty difficult to like legitimately get hold of it nowadays. The DVD, like it came out on DVD back in like the mid to late 2000s, but it went out of print pretty quickly. You can buy copies on Amazon, but they're like $100 and up because they're so rare. And it's not available to watch on any legal streaming services. I will say that I did happen to find one right here on this platform, kind of like a high def, like bootleg one. And some people have posted them. So, you know, if you want to see it, that's pretty much your only option at this point, unless you want to pay $100 for a DVD of it. And like I said, that's kind of a shame. Now, it turns out that one of the reasons for its, you know, back when it came out, like why it didn't really get much of a release and why it kind of got, you know, just fobbed off or like not really given any publicity or anything like that was actually like pretty fucking sad. Well, very fucking sad. So Jose Menendez, who at that stage was the chairman of Carolco Pictures, who was the distribution company, was actually murdered along with his wife Kitty in the very famous Menendez brothers murder, Lyle and Eric Menendez killing their parents with shotguns. And it so happened that the father that they killed was the head of Carolco Pictures. So this murder ended up interfering with the release of Fright Night Part 2 and also ended up kind of putting the kibosh on any plans for a third movie, because it so happened that Roddy McDowall, who obviously was in the first two movies and really liked playing the Peter Vincent character and wanted to do a third film, him and Tom Holland had actually set up a meeting with Jose Menendez to talk about doing a third Fright Night movie. But of course, Jose Menendez got murdered, and then subsequently that did not happen. So it was just kind of shitty circumstances all around. So I'm going to say that, I mean, it's like I said, it's just a real shame, because even though Fright Night Part 2 is not nearly as good as the first movie, because like I said, the first Fright Night from 1985, you know, easily one of my favorite horror comedies of all time. I just love that movie, and I've seen it a million times. So the second one obviously is going to pale in comparison, but it's still like a really solid, really entertaining sequel, and I think it deserves a lot more love, and it deserves like a lot larger cult following than I believe it has. It does have a little bit of one, but I think it needs a bigger one, honestly, because it's a lot better than it really has any right to be. Now, what ended up happening with this? So the original director, Tom Holland, of the first Fright Night, he was actually, you know, after the first Fright Night in 1985 was so successful, he actually did want to do a sequel. But by the time, you know, it went through all the hoops and everything, and by the time Part 2, like, the project was available, he was already working on Child's Play. Now, as it happened, the actor Chris Sarandon, who played Jerry Dandridge in the first Fright Night movie, it was also in Child's Play, obviously. So neither Tom Holland nor Chris Sarandon could return for Part 2. And the original script that Tom Holland wrote did actually have roles for the Evil Ed character, who was played by Stephen Jeffries, who actually he got killed in the first movie, spoiler alert, but you know, they could have brought him back if they needed to. And the Charlie's girlfriend from the original Amy, which was Amanda Bierce. Now, neither of those actors returned either. Stephen Jeffries, because he wanted to play the lead in 976 Evil, the movie that was directed by Robert Englund, so he was working on that. And at the time that they were filming Fright Night Part 2, Amanda Bierce was already on Married with Children, obviously a very successful TV show, so she didn't really have time to do it. However, they did get William Ragsdale, who obviously played Charlie Brewster in the first movie, and the great Roddy McDowall, who played Peter Vincent, the great vampire killer. Both of them did return for Part 2, and I will say that their interactions are just as fun, like this time around, I think. Now, the director of this one actually ended up being Tommy Lee Wallace, who probably best known to horror fans for writing and directing Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which came out in 1982, among other things, but that's kind of the one he's best known for. So the story of Fright Night 2 takes place, just as in real life, 3 years after the events of the original film. So Charlie Brewster, who was in high school in the first movie, is now a college student, and he's been in therapy after all of his, harrowing experiences with the undead in the first movie. Now, because vampires obviously are not supposed to exist, Charlie's psychiatrist has convinced him that Jerry Dandridge was just a serial killer and that Charlie just perceived him like as a supernatural creature. And he also says that him and all his friends were just swept up in a kind of like mass psychosis, mass hypnosis type situation that made them all believe that vampires were real because of the trauma of interacting with this very real serial killer who lived next door and all of that. So because of all this, Charlie he's kind of a little bit estranged from the Peter Vincent character, who is still convinced that Jerry Dandridge was really a vampire. So as I said, because the actress Amanda Bierce couldn't return for the sequel as Amy, Charlie has a new girlfriend in this movie, which, like I said, that's kind of realistic because you don't necessarily have the same girlfriend when you're in high school or college or whatever. So his girlfriend this time around is a clinical psychology student whose name is Alex, who's played by Tracy Lind. The implication, at least the implication that I got, was that they hadn't really been dating for that long, and there's a little bit of a repeat of kind of the sexual repression angle that was going on in the first movie, you know what I mean? Because like Amy wouldn't put out, it was like this big thing, and you know what I mean? So in this movie, it's kind of implied that Alex and Charlie also haven't had sex either, and that they're kind of like, not yet, and they're just kind of will they, won't they, or it's that kind of like they're building up to that situation. So I guess it's like kind of a new relationship, right? Since Charlie has concluded that, and he's now saying back to his psychiatrist, yes, he wasn't really a vampire, and he seems to have really internalized the fact that he had just made it all up. So his therapist actually talks him into going, it's like, why don't you go visit Peter Vincent, and you guys can talk, and you can have some closure about the whole thing or whatever. So Charlie and a girlfriend go to dinner at Peter Vincent's apartment, and, they have a really pleasant time. Peter starts telling the girlfriend about all of these, their brief but heroic times as vampire killers, you know what I mean? And, well, Alex already knows all about it because Charlie has told her, but obviously she thinks it's a delusion, right? So she's kind of like, oh, this old man still believes in the delusion, but she thinks he's really sweet and everything. Now, Charlie does not tell Peter Vincent that he no longer believes what they went through was like entirely real. They still believe that Jerry Dandridge killed people, that he was a serial killer, but not that he was a vampire, So, I mean, he seems to kind of want to spare Peter Vincent's feelings, right? Because that's like his good friend. So he doesn't really come out and say, hey, I don't believe that anymore, and I kind of think you're crazy, However, while Charlie is kind of looking out the window of Peter's apartment, he sees something which is kind of reminiscent of in the first movie where he's looking at his bedroom window and sees, Jerry and Billy Cole like bringing coffins or what looks like coffins like into the house next door and putting them into the basement. He sees something that kind of looks like that, only this time it's a group of people unloading a bunch of, very suspiciously coffin looking boxes off of a truck or out of a van or whatever and carrying them into the building. Now, Charlie later sees this group of people, and it so happens that they're moving into an apartment down the hall from Peter Vincent, right? And, they look pretty unique, I guess. Now, of particular note in this group of people, is this really beautiful, elegant woman whose name we later find out is Regine, and she's played by Julie Carmen. Now, Charlie is just immediately smitten, entranced, enchanted, whatever, by her. So much so that, like, after he sees them, he just sees them briefly, like, kind of going across the lobby, and he sees them in the elevator, and, like, they kind of make eye contact, and he's like, what? You know what I mean? But so later, when he drives his girlfriend Alex home, and they kind of start making out in the car, and then he sees Regine's face instead of his girlfriend's face, and it kind of like freaks him out a little bit. And then they kind of reveal that Regine has actually apparently like flown into the area and is like laying on the roof of the car, you know what I mean, like kind of tapping on it with her finger. So she's like controlling his thoughts already, you know. So the other people that are in Regine's group, so you have Louis, who's kind of a werewolf vampire hybrid. He's mostly a werewolf, like, to be honest, and he's coincidentally played by the same actor, John Grease, who played the Wolfman in The Monster Squad, the movie directed by Fred Decker, which came out only like a year or two before this, I guess. 87, I think that came out, right? So he's kind of like the movie's comic relief, I guess. He's sort of like playing the Evil Ed type character, even though he's a villain. You also have Belle, who's played by Russell Clark, who's this kind of sexually ambiguous vampire. He's always going around on roller skates, has a really cool look, really cool hair. And then you have Bosworth, who's played by Brian Thompson, who's this kind of like big like bodybuilder type dude who also is always like eating bugs. So he kind of seems like a combination of Renfield from Dracula and Billy Cole, who was like the thrall from the first movie, like Jerry Dandridge's like right hand man, you know what I'm saying? Now, you know, and I know that all of these people are vampires, right? But even though, like, I kind of feel like Charlie is sort of starting to have his doubts. Now, he has this, what he thinks is an extremely realistic dream about Regine, where she, like, comes to his dorm room and, like, drinks a little bit of his blood, like, out of a shaving cut that he got earlier. So even though he's kind of starting to get weirded out, he's still able to tell himself that, oh, well, maybe I'm just having a little bit of a relapse and I'm just imagining things. Like, there aren't really any vampires. Gonna say, though, the vampires aren't real sneaky about just snacking on people pretty much out in the open. Belle, the one, the vampire on roller skates, like, they attack somebody, like, just like another student, like in the hallway of the college or whatever. And actually Louis, the werewolf one, he kind of tries to climb up to Alex's window, like he's gonna eat her, but like he falls off, and it's this whole, you know, kind of comedic situation. Now, so later on in the movie, Charlie and Alex are supposed to go on a date to this symphony, which, like, Charlie is like, man, I don't really want to go to that, but she's just kind of like, you know, it's kind of like this whole thing where she's trying to like introduce him to culture because he just likes all this lowbrow horror trash, you know. It doesn't play a lot into the plot, but they do kind of talk about that a little bit. But while Charlie is on the way there, like, he's running late, it's like, in a way, like, he's like the world's worst, not the world's worst boyfriend, there's a lot worse, but just in the way that he's just so he's just always running late. He never shows up when he says he's going to. He like keeps standing her up, and I'm just like, holy crap. It's just like he's so low effort, you know what I mean? Or he's just like constantly getting distracted. It's just that kind of thing. So they're supposed to go to the symphony. She's really excited about it. She bought him a ticket and all this other stuff. And so he oversleeps or whatever. And then like, so he's on the way there, like rushing his ass off. But then he gets distracted by seeing his friend, Richie, who had come in earlier, like, asking if he could borrow a tie. Oh, I got this date with this real arty chick or whatever. So he sees Richie, like, kind of smooching on and getting into a car with Regine, right? So Charlie at this point is, like, kind of suspicious, maybe jealous, maybe horny, and maybe a little bit too, starting to believe, oh, maybe Regine actually maybe is a vampire, and like maybe she might be dangerous. So maybe I should do something about this. So he actually follows them kind of on a whim. And as they go back to the apartment building, like he climbs up on a, nobody closes their blinds in horror movies. I don't know what that is, but yeah. So it's a good thing. No one would see anything, but yeah. So that's definitely applies here. But yeah, so he climbs up on like a fire escape or something, and he looks in the window of Regine's apartment and sees what appears to be Regine and Belle like tying Richie to this kind of chase type situation, and it looks like they're drinking his blood. So Charlie starts to panic, thinking, holy shit, like, you know, the psychiatrist was wrong, vampires are real. So he runs to Peter's apartment, which, like I said, is in the same building as Regine's apartment, conveniently, and tells Peter Vincent what's going on. So Peter is like pretty reluctant, like he was in the first movie, because he's kind of a coward. That's sort of one of his things, but he does kind of come through in the clutch. So he suits up and gets all his gear and everything. And so they go down the hall to Regine's apartment. But when they get there and knock on the door, as you do, hey, are you a vampire? Are you killing somebody in here? Can we just, you know what I mean? But it turns out that she's just having this big party, like with a vampire theme. And there's just all these people. There's like loads of people there. It's a massive apartment, too. I don't know how they fit it in this building. And there's like a big bowl filled with fake fangs, and like everything is vampire themed, right? So Peter is like really relieved by seeing this, and he's just like, oh, Charlie, you're being so silly. It's like, it's just a party. That's all it is. It's just a theme. You didn't really see anything. It's weird too, the way the belief, like the two characters, like belief in vampires is kind of like keeps switching back and forth. You know what I mean? Because at first, Charlie is the one that doesn't believe because he's been convinced by a psychiatrist that he imagined it all. And Peter Vincent is still very much like on the page of, you know, vampires are real and we need to keep on the lookout for that shit. But then, so he's scared. But then when Charlie is like, holy shit, I think you're right, like vampires are real. But then when they go to the apartment and he sees that it's just a party, he's like, oh, you know, see, there's no vampires. You're just being silly. So that seems a little bit weird. But yeah. So they find out actually that Regine is apparently like pretty famous in some circles for being like a performance artist. And that's kind of her big thing, is like doing these big vampiric like performances and stuff. Now, Charlie actually finds his friend Richie at the party, and he seems like pretty drunk, but otherwise he seems like okay. He doesn't seem like he's been snacked on or anything. There's no bite marks on his neck or nothing. He's just kind of like whatever, and he just like wanders off with his Perrier or whatever. So okay, so at that point, Charlie has to admit, well, shit, maybe I am imagining things. After all, like, I just jumped the gun. It's like, it's just a party, and I saw something that, you know, that I misinterpreted. So he very dejectedly, like, leaves the party, and suddenly, now that it's this many hours later, finally remembers that he has actually blew off his symphony date with Alex, and that the symphony is way over by now. However, after Charlie leaves and like drives to the theater where the symphony is, obviously it's been over for hours. But after he leaves the party, Peter stays at the party because he's having a good time, you know. But then he sees what appears to be someone like biting someone's neck, like over in this back, like dark corner, right? And he's just like, oh, that's kind of fishy. And then he takes out his trusty little hand mirror, which was kind of a big prop in the first movie, and he kind of points it at Regine and notices that she does not cast a reflection. So at this point, he's like, oh, crap, he's in big trouble. So he attempts to, you know, flee from the apartment. But actually, Regine catches up with him because she's a vampire and she can, like, fly around and shit. And she tells him that she is indeed a real vampire. And not only that, she's actually the sister of Jerry Dandridge. And she is gunning to get revenge on Charlie and Peter for what they did to her brother in the first movie. They killed him and blew him up. So there's that. Now, Alex, the girlfriend, the one that was stood up at the symphony by Charlie, who completely forgot about her. Now, while she was standing outside waiting for his dumbass, the werewolf, Louie, like, happened by the theater and was like, hey, would you happen to have an extra ticket? And she's like, well, yeah, because my stupid-ass boyfriend didn't show up, so here, take it. So they actually went to the symphony together, and then he ended up, like, walking her home after the show, trying to, like, get to know her better. He's, like, a little bit creepy, but not, like, over-the-top creepy. And I guess what he's trying to do is he's trying to, like, lure her into the clutches of the vampire clan so that she can later be used to punish Charlie, because that's kind of what the vampires are planning to do. Like Regine, what she wants to do, she just wants to kill Peter Vincent and all the other ones. But because Charlie was the main one that killed Jerry, she wants to turn Charlie into a vampire so she can torture him forever, like in revenge. Now, because as I mentioned, Regine has been showing up in Charlie's dreams, or so he imagines them, and kind of just drinking small amounts of blood from him, he starts slowly transforming into a vampire. So, like, he's wearing sunglasses all the time. Like, you know, he can't eat garlic and blah, blah, Regine also manages to steal Peter Vincent's hosting gig on the TV show Fright Night, like his little late night horror hosting show. So Peter gets fired, like, and she starts doing her performance art thing because, the producers are like, well, we need some new blood, you know what I mean? That's literally. So Peter gets fired, and then once he has determined that she's actually a vampire, he shows up on the set with a stake, and he's, like, gonna kill her. And obviously he gets arrested, and then he gets sent to a mental hospital because he's insisting that she's a real vampire and that he needs to get rid of her. Now, Louie, the werewolf, is also continuing to stalk Alex. Like, she's at the library one night studying, and Charlie is actually there with her and shows up late as usual, but he actually does show up this time. So once Louie shows up at the library, and she sees him transform into his, werewolf form or whatever. So she finally believes that Charlie and Peter are telling the truth. Now, she is actually able to, thwart Louie because Charlie brought her, a bouquet of roses, and she, stuffs the roses into his mouth. And she only learned that roses were damaging to vampires, or, werewolves, I guess. Like, he's supposed to be a vampire, but he's kind of like a werewolf, you know what I mean? But, they're similar, so I'm not going to complain too much about it. But she actually had sped read Dracula, the novel. She had never read it before. Because remember how I said, earlier she was trying to, make him more cultured because he was into all this lowbrow horror trash? And he, yelled at her. It's like, haven't you ever read Dracula? It's like there's some great literature in the genre and stuff like that. So she felt bad, for making fun of his lowbrow tastes, I guess. So she actually went through and, sped read Dracula, and that was how she knew, about the roses. So I thought that was kind of a cute little detail. So now the vampires are all coming after our heroes. Peter Vincent is still in the insane asylum. Now Alex, who is studying to be a clinical psychologist, she is able to fake being a psychiatrist long enough to kind of spring Peter out of the hospital. She kind of talks her way out. And at this point, the whole gang, they assemble at Peter's apartment building to kind of battle the remaining vampires in the basement lair, you know what I mean? In a similar kind of climax scene to what you saw in the first one. And they're really trying to kill Regine before the sun comes up so Charlie doesn't transform. Just as in the first movie, they were trying to kill Jerry before the sun came up so that Amy wouldn't transform. So it's the same kind of thing. It's, So as I said, this isn't, I'm not going to say this is as good as the first Fright Night, because it's not. I mean, not many movies are as great as the first Fright Night, so, that's really no ding on it. The villains in this one are cool, but they're not quite as menacing or quite as charismatic as Jerry Dandridge and Billy Cole were in the first one. And I have to say, I really did miss the presence of Evil Ed. Obviously he was killed in the first movie, in what was actually a surprisingly touching scene. I thought that was really well done. But, of course, he could have been resurrected if necessary. It's vampires, after all. You can bring people back from the dead. I will say, too, that I think the special effects in this one are good, but they're not quite as good as they were in the first one, even though I think the budgets for both movies were about comparable, between $7 and $9 million. I think both of them cost to make. So the special effects in this one, like I said, still good, but not as good as in the first movie. But all of that said, I think this is a really fun 80s vampire movie. I mean, it has a pretty fast-paced story, has some good humor in it, and has some really nice shot compositions. I particularly like a lot of the neon lighting and stuff. I also liked that this movie used a lot of the iconic music from the first movie, which kind of made it, feel like it was a continuing narrative, which I thought was really cool. And Roddy McDowall and William Ragsdale, they have really great chemistry together. Wish they'd had a couple more scenes together, maybe spent more time together, but there's still a lot of good stuff with them, with the two of them. I also really liked Tracy Lind in this as Alex. She was a real good addition to the cast. She was more of a proactive character than Amy from the first movie. And, I like that she kind of had to save Charlie's ass on multiple occasions instead of, in the first, it's just kind of, a reversal of the first movie where he had to save her all the time because she got, taken by the vampire and put under his spell or whatever. I also really liked the angle of making the main vampire performance artist. I liked that idea of it's the vampires they're hiding in plain sight, which I guess Anne Rice did that too, with the Theater of the Vampires and stuff. So it's a similar kind of idea. I just wish the movie had done a little bit more than with that, because really the only time that came up was when they went to the party, and then when she was doing the the Fright Night show, and just like, oh, she's just a performance artist, like she's not a real vampire. But I kind of wish they had done a little bit more with it, or I wish that had gone on a little bit longer, like it was still like ambiguous a little bit longer, like if she was a real vampire. I mean, obviously we know she's a real vampire, but like the characters didn't know, you know what I mean? But I will say that Julie Carmen was fantastic in this as Regine, and she really sold that kind of, I mean, she seemed very vampiric, she seemed like very otherworldly, so I think she did like a really great job. She was a really great character. Now, Tom Holland has actually expressed interest in finally doing a third Fright Night movie. Now, the script that he has, at least according to him, actually ignores the events of this movie entirely, as well as, there was a remake in 2011, and then that also had a sequel in 2013, so that's going to ignore all of that also. What it's going to do, like if they make a third movie, is that all of the surviving cast would return, and that the story would continue from the end of the 1985 original. At least that was the gist that I got. Now, I haven't heard any updates on that for a couple of years. I think the last time I heard about that was like maybe 2020. So there's a good chance that might never happen. Though I would be curious to see like what direction Holland would take that in. Roddy McDowall has sadly passed away, and I feel like it would be kind of hard to do a Fright Night movie without him, because he's such an integral part of the Fright Night universe. But I would be willing to give it a chance if Tom Holland directed and if all of the original cast came back. So like I said, I really do feel like maybe someday Fright Night Part 2 will have the larger cult following that it deserves. Maybe someday it will get a proper Blu-ray, high definition release, like with all the bells and whistles and behind the scenes stuff. That would be really cool. But, that day is not now, at least as of this recording. So until then, you're just going to have to find a bootleg of it if you want to watch it. In my opinion, it's kind of a little bit of a minor underrated gem. And if you like vampire movies from the 80s, you really do kind of owe yourself to see it. Because like I said, it's not nearly as good as the first one, but it's like way better than a sequel to Fright Night really had any right to be. And it's a really entertaining movie in its own right. And I think more people should see it. So that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. Thank you very much, Dermot, for recommending that I do this movie, because it was really cool to like rewatch it. Like I said, I'd seen it a couple times before, but always nice to do a revisit on something that I hadn't seen in a long time. So yeah, that'll do it for this review. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. And I will see you again on the next one. Bye.